Imagine being 21 years old and about to inherit $1 billion. It seems like a dream worth envying. A life without financial worries, filled with luxury, travel, and endless opportunities. But for the Inman twins, Georgia Noel Inman and Walker Patterson Inman II, this fortune was not a blessing. On the contrary, it became a curse. Their story is not one of wealth leading to happiness. It is a tragedy where money became a source of pain, fear, and isolation. Raised in an environment of violence, cruelty, and addiction, they were children robbed of their childhood. Their lives, spent in massive mansions, resembled a dark fairy tale where gold brought no joy, only deepened their suffering. This is a story that proves even with an unimaginable fortune, one can still be the poorest child in the world. Chapter 1. The Duke Legacy. The story of the Inman twins traces back to a deep-rooted past, to the late 19th century, when one of the most powerful business dynasties in the United States was emerging. The Duke family became synonymous with immense wealth, influence, and power. Their legacy began with one man, James Buchanan Duke. How tobacco made the Dukes billionaires. James Buchanan Duke was born in 1856 in North Carolina. His father, Washington Duke, owned a small tobacco plantation, but young James had much bigger ambitions. He recognized that the future lay in mass production of cigarettes and began aggressively introducing new technologies, including the first automated cigarette-making machine. Before long, he founded the American Tobacco Company, which monopolized the market by crushing its largest competitors. With aggressive marketing strategies and revolutionary production methods, his products flooded stores across America. By 1900, Duke had become one of the most influential entrepreneurs in the country, amassing a fortune worth millions of dollars, an astronomical sum for the time. But he didn't stop there. He understood that relying solely on tobacco was risky, so he diversified his investments. Duke ventured into hydroelectric power, founding Duke Power Company, and expanded into real estate, building one of the largest private fortunes in U.S. history. The Billionaire's Daughter. The Curse of Doris Duke. James Duke died in 1925, leaving behind nearly $100 million, equivalent to more than $1.5 billion today, to his only daughter, Doris Duke. Doris became the richest girl in America, but her life was far from a fairy tale. Surrounded by unimaginable wealth, she always felt alone. Several failed marriages, strange obsessions, and an eccentric lifestyle made her a victim of her own family name. She desperately searched for happiness, dating famous actors, collecting priceless works of art, and traveling the world. Yet, despite her fortune, she was always surrounded by people who sought to exploit her wealth. By the time of her death in 1993, she was completely alone. She left behind not only a massive fortune, but also a long trail of legal battles. She had willed her wealth to a charitable foundation, sparking bitter disputes among potential heirs. How the Dukes and Inmans became one family. The Duke family lived on through distant relatives, and over time, their wealth became intertwined with another powerful clan, the Inmans. The Inman family was also among the wealthiest in America, having built its fortune in real estate and banking. Their lineage traces back to George Inman, a Civil War veteran whose descendants made shrewd investments in major American corporations. Generations later, these two powerful families merged through Walker Patterson Inman Jr., better known as Skipper. He was Doris Duke's nephew and inherited a portion of her multi-billion-dollar estate. However, unlike his ancestors, he possessed neither business acumen nor the ambition to grow the family fortune. Instead, his life became a whirlwind of drug addiction, alcoholism, and multiple divorces. And it was he who became the father of Georgia and Walker Inman, the children destined to inherit the curse of wealth. Chapter 2. Destructive Luxury. From the moment they were born, twins Georgia Noel Inman and Walker Patterson Inman II were destined for a life of immense wealth and luxury. They entered the world in 1997 as heirs to one of the most powerful and affluent families in America, set to inherit the multi-billion-dollar fortune of the Duke Tobacco Empire. But behind the grand facades of palaces, private jets, and unimaginable riches lay a horrifying reality. Their childhood was anything but carefree. It resembled the plot of a Gothic novel, where behind the walls of magnificent mansions lurked unspeakable horrors, lavish palaces, and hidden fears. From an early age, the twins lived in conditions that most children could only dream of. They moved between a collection of extravagant estates, a massive mansion in South Carolina, where the rooms were adorned with antique masterpieces, a ranch in Wyoming, complete with its own stables, hunting grounds, and multiple swimming pools, private island homes, accessible only by personal helicopters. They could have attended the finest schools, traveled the world, and enjoyed every privilege their last name afforded them. But the reality was far from glamorous. Their father, Skipper Inman, despite his immeasurable wealth, was a man consumed by chaos and addiction. Cocaine, heroin, alcohol. He destroyed himself year after year, and in doing so, shattered his children's lives along the way. Children in a golden cage. Skipper Inman was married 6 times, and each of his wives played a role in the tragic saga of the twins. They were forced to endure relentless scandals, violence, and an almost unimaginable level of cruelty. They were locked in rooms without access to food or a bathroom, left to sit for hours in the dark while their father hosted yet another wild party. They were beaten. When their father flew into a rage, a frequent occurrence, he would throw them against walls or lash them with a belt. They were deprived of a proper education. Instead of attending school, they had private tutors, but lessons were often disrupted by the chaos unfolding in their home. "We had a hellish childhood," Walker later recalled. "It wasn't upbringing, it was survival." Chapter 3. The House of Horror. After their mother passed away when they were still very young, the twins' only official guardian became their father. This marked the beginning of an even darker chapter in their lives. Hell on earth. Owning millions means owning power. Skipper wielded that power to its fullest. When social services showed interest in the children's well-being, he managed to buy his way out of trouble every time. The twins endured unimaginable torture. They were forced to play Russian roulette. A loaded revolver was pressed against their heads. Then the trigger was pulled. They were made to eat rotten food. Spoiled meat was placed in front of them. And if they refused, they were beaten with a belt. They lived in constant fear of their father and the people he surrounded himself with. His parties were filled with shady individuals, drug addicts, criminals, and prostitutes. One time, he tied us up and threw us into a closet. We were 7 years old, Georgia recounted. Any attempt to complain or escape only resulted in even more brutal punishment. When money and power are above the law. Social services received multiple reports that something horrific was happening inside the Inman household. But every time, the case was either dismissed or ended in a meaningless inspection. Money ruled everything. A nanny who later spoke to journalists about what she had witnessed recalled. There was no love, no care. There was money, drugs, and fear. And for a long time, it seemed like the nightmare would never end. Until one day, everything changed. Chapter 4. The Death of Skipper. In the year 2010, when the twins were 12 years old, their father died of a drug overdose. This was a turning point in their lives. It seemed like everything would finally change. No more daily beatings, no more screaming, no more nights locked in their rooms. But instead of relief, a new battle began, a war over their guardianship, and most importantly, over their money. Who would control the billion? Their mother, Dacia Inman, fought to get them back. She filed a lawsuit to gain custody of her children. But standing in her way was a complex system of legal restrictions, designed not to protect the twins, but to control their multi-billion-dollar inheritance. The banks that managed their vast fortune had no intention of letting go of their control. What followed was a legal war that dragged on for years. The children became nothing more than pawns in a game played by powerful people, people who didn't care about them. The only thing that mattered was the money. Orphans, but not free. With their father gone, the twins were officially orphans. But instead of finally living a normal life, they found themselves trapped in an endless legal battle over who would control their destiny. We were never really children. We had to fight for our lives from the moment we were born, Walker later said. They inherited $1 billion, yet they had nothing. No love, no family, no security. And ahead of them lay an even harsher truth. Even after turning 21, they would not have full access to their own fortune. Chapter 5. The Poorest Rich Kids. After their father's death, the Inman twins became the focus of intense media attention. They weren't just heirs to $1 billion fortune. They became a symbol of fate's cruel irony. They were children who had everything, yet at the same time, had nothing. They owned palaces, but never felt at home. They were wealthy, but couldn't even buy food without their guardian's approval. They belonged to one of America's most powerful dynasties, yet no one truly cared about their future. When billions don't make you free. By 2011, when the twins were 14 years old, they found themselves at the center of a legal storm. Their mother, Daisha Inman, was still fighting for custody, but she faced off against powerful legal structures that controlled the family fortune. They had no access to their own money. Although they were billionaires on paper, every cent was controlled by trust funds. Guardians came and went, but none truly cared for them. Their lives were nothing more than bargaining chips in a high-stakes game played by others. Banks and lawyers kept suing each other, all while forgetting that real human lives were at stake. The media ran headlines calling them America's poorest rich kids, emphasizing the bitter truth. Their wealth brought them no happiness. Walker's Confessions, a childhood of horror. By 2013, as teenagers, the twins began speaking publicly for the first time. Walker Patterson, Inman II, in particular, was brutally honest. In one interview, he revealed that their childhood had been like a horror movie. Our father was a monster. He tortured us, beat us, and made us do things normal kids couldn't even imagine. When reporters asked him why no one had stepped in to help, he gave a bitter smile and said, "Money can make people look the other way." Georgia was less vocal, but her silence spoke volumes. They had been through too much to simply move on and forget. Chapter 6. Growing up and the struggle for control. When the twins turned 18, it seemed like they would finally be able to take control of their own lives. But reality had something else in store for them. $1 billion turned into $60 million. According to the original will, when they turned 21, they were supposed to inherit $1 billion. But by the time they reached adulthood, most of their fortune had vanished. Legal battles and attorney fees had drained a massive portion of their wealth. Financial managers had invested the money, but some of the assets turned out to be questionable. The remaining funds were frozen due to yet another wave of lawsuits. In the end, when Walker and Georgia reached adulthood, they didn't receive $1 billion. They got around $60 million instead. Of course, $60 million was still a huge sum. But considering the scale of their inheritance, it was nothing more than a drop in the ocean. Freedom or just another cage? Even though they were no longer under guardianship, their lives didn't get any easier. Their access to money was still restricted. To withdraw large amounts, they needed approval from financial managers. The lawsuits continued. Even as legal adults, a significant portion of their inheritance remained under the control of third parties. They struggled to find themselves. No matter how much they tried to move forward, their past haunted them. "We grew up in hell," Walker said. "We don't know how to live a normal life." Chapter 7. The Disappearance. After 2019, the Inman twins vanished from the public eye. What happened to them? Georgia Inman left the United States and completely cut off communication with the media. Her whereabouts remain unknown, and no one can say for sure what she is doing now. Walker Inman II attempted to build a career in business, but soon after, he too disappeared from public view. They stopped appearing in the news, gave no further interviews, and took no part in public life. The destructive power of wealth. The story of the Inman twins is not just a story about inheritance. It is a story about how money can destroy a person. Their childhood was stolen from them. Their fate was never in their own hands. It was dictated by others. Their last name was not a privilege, but a curse. They disappeared, as if trying to erase their past. Maybe that was their only chance at survival. The story of the Inman twins shows that money is not always freedom. Sometimes they become chains from which it is impossible to get rid of. They were born into a family with a billion-dollar fortune, but were never able to find a real life. And perhaps their disappearance is their only attempt to start over.